Thank you for joining us on today's webinar, hosted by the National Center for Pyramid Model Innovations. My name is Victor Trinidad from NCPMI. This webinar is part of the Let's Talk webinar series. Today's topic is How to Be Anti-Racist, presented by Dorothy Shapland, Ioma Aruka, and Jennifer Neitzel. Today's host is Rosemarie Allen. Thank you very much, Rosemarie.
Thank you. Thank you, Victor. So today we're talking about creating anti-racist early childhood spaces. So why? Why this webinar and why now? So the events that resulted from the murder of George Floyd has led to worldwide protests. And these protests have been multiracial and multi-generational. It has shed the light on racial injustice in ways that we've never seen before. This movement has inspired the nation, it's inspired the world. We want to learn more, know more, and do more. And today we're going to talk about how to create an anti-racist early childhood space, which is absolutely critical in addressing racism in our society. We know that racism is inherent in our society, and we must address these issues in early childhood classrooms so that we can prevent the injustices that we see today. Because it's in our early childhood classrooms where future doctors are sitting who can learn from us and as they become doctors, address health inequities. There are future economists who can grow up and address wealth inequities. There are future police officers who can grow up and address inequities in policing that has led us to where we are today. Before speaking of creating anti-racist spaces, let's define what it means to be anti-racist. So the essence of anti-racism, I'm going to take my slide back, is action. It's the action that must follow the emotional and intellectual awareness of racism. Right now we're emotional. Intellectually, we all know that racism exists, but an anti-racism is the action that follows that emotional and intellectual awareness. So what does anti-racist mean? It means racism is not neutral because it exists. Racism is. So there's no neutrality there. You're either racist or you're anti-racist. What do I mean by that? I mean that allowing racism to exist is a passive racist. And this is based on the work of Ibram X. Kendi and How to Be Anti-Racist. Confronting racial injustices is anti-racist. And what you have to remember is that there is no such thing as not racist. So you're not off the hook by saying, oh, I'm not racist. Either you're actively fighting against racism or you're a passive racist. And that's the reality that we'll be talking about today. The only way to undo racism is to consistently identify it, describe it, and dismantle it. It's the action that we're talking about. And so many people have been taught to be colorblind. How many times have you all heard, I don't see race, I just see children. We see race. We can't help but see race. And when we fail to see it, or deny that we see it, we fail to see racism. And when we fail to see racism, it creates passive racists. So a racist is not who you are, but it's what you do. And it's also what you fail to do. So what is a racist? A racist is a person, it's one who supports, and or promotes racist behaviors, racist ideas, racist actions and policies through direct action or inaction. An anti-racist, on the other hand, is a person who supports and promotes anti-racist actions, ideas, policies, laws, protocols through direct action. And racism. Racism includes racist behaviors, racist policies, racist ideas, and actions that results in, sustains, and normalizes racial inequities. So before we go on, are there any questions? I see a couple of things popping up in the chat box. Let me see. And I'm not able to go to the chat box yet. So let's go ahead and start with Ioma. Ioma, a lot of people are asking, how does anti-racism fit into early childhood when we all love children?
Well, first, I want to just thank you, Dr. Allen, for creating this space and being bold and courageous in really saying the truth to what is happening. So I want to thank you first and foremost for that, and obviously thank my other co-panelists and colleagues. So I would first say this, so, getting your seatbelt, so just, put your seatbelt on, let's go. So early childhood, let's remember the contemporary early child we know has a history. And the history lives in the US. And if you know history, if you don't, go, the African American History Museum has a whole thing on it. You understand that US was created on a racialized system. That is, the idea is to promulgate and foster white supremacy and to oppress others who are not that. Early childhood started, the contemporary version that we know now, started with the notion, right, that poor children who were not ready for public education, our K-12 system, needs to be prepared. And most of those children happen to be Black. And a lot of the evidence that we have comes from high school, preschool. I'm at high school as a chief research officer, and also for Carolina Abbotsford, where I was and Jen Neitzel was at UNC Chapel Hill. Those studies had pretty much 95 to 99% Black children who were poor. And they were the experiment, in essence, to help us create what we now know as early childhood and what we need from it. So the history of it started with a sense that, look, poor Black people, your kids are not ready for public education and you're not meeting the standards that we have set. So we need to get ready. We need to bring your kids over to this here white-run organization or building. When we're done fixing them, we're gonna give them back to you. Now, with that knowledge, I'm not trying to denigrate, because I'm part of the early childhood world. I'm not trying to denigrate the intentionality behind it, but the idea came from very fraught a system of trying to fix children without recognizing in the 60s and 70s that there was a racist system that created children not being able to have opportunities to thrive due to many, many things, AKA racism. So the history of early childhood just starts in that space. And as it continues and morphs into whether it's pre-K programs or the quality rate improvement systems, whatever systems we create, if it's under the guise of the US, you can actually say that, yes, it probably is racist. So racism actually just continues to privilege the way of being white at the expense of the way of being, whether you're a person of color. Let's talk with Black people. It does not privilege Black people. And so whatever systems we have, from the assessments, who gets to be called, quote unquote, a real educator that will actually get pension and benefits, all the systems we have created within early childhood just promulgates the issue of racism in many, many ways. The way we set up the classrooms, what we think is high quality interactions, who does it well, who doesn't do it well. So the idea of early childhood in many ways, again, no, not complete fault of early childhood, is part of a larger systemic issue that often views Black children as less than. And I just want to point out one more thing. The fact that what we know as early childhood was literally built on the backs of Black children and families, they also are less likely to be in the highest quality programs, however we define that. So the racism is not just a behavior of individuals. It's actually a system that continues to perpetuate inequities and legalizes it. So early childhood legalized this notion of there's only one way of being high quality, one way of being, and then incentivizes us to continue to perpetuate system, standards, assessments, et cetera. So without ever saying, what are we doing to ensure that the culture of who, say, Black people are is fully part of the system. There's never been an interrogation of, hey, curricula people, does this curriculum meet the needs of Black children specific if they're the originators of what we know as early childhood? So in many ways, early childhood, to be anti-racist, will have to actually interrogate every aspect of it. But that starts with acknowledging that even if it was under the quote unquote good intentions, mind you, slavery was under good intentions too. Under the notion of good intentions, when you still perpetuate it under a system that's racialized as it is, to not interrogate every part of it, you will still be racist. But by trying to at least understand and interrogate it from an anti-racist point of view, we can then say, okay, are we doing things right that really privileges other people beyond just white people? And then we can move towards a direction of anti-racism.
Right. Can I say something, Rosemary?
Yes,
To build on what Ayoma said, because we were actually having a discussion yesterday with a group of educators that we were providing some training to about, you know, the environment scale, the rating scales that are used to measure quality. And, you know, there's such a adherence to those within, you know, and what that means to have high quality. But those rating scales were developed within the context of white European ideology about what is high quality early childhood education. So just, you know, going back to what you said, Ayoma, we're going to have to critically examine every aspect of the early childhood system. And this is going to be hard for a lot of people because we take great pride in the early childhood education system, but it is inherently racist. And we're going to have to dismantle a whole bunch of stuff to make it just and equitable for all children.
And on top of that, that means that we have to take some of your wealth and what you are away, right? So by actually even us have, so Rosemary, FYI, even you having this session and then us saying what we're saying, in some ways we're going to have to tell people who have made their wealth that what you have done is literally benefits you yourself, your family, right, your generational wealth has been built on that. And so what are you going to do to undo the damage you've done because you yourself, whether because you're colorblind or just didn't know, and you just thought about it's about poor kids without the color part, that means that they themselves will have to literally say, am I willing to sort of say that what I was doing was wrong? That is going to be the hardest part, is not just marching and protesting, great, but you're going to have to question that my Lexus and my Benz was literally built on having the system operate the way it does and keeping my job alive.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you.
Right. Yeah, there's a question about, is the accreditation from NAEYC considered racist?
Mm-hmm. And we get that feedback a lot because in our system, whiteness is normalized. So that's the measuring tool for everything else that follows. So I appreciate this look at the historical aspects of racism and how the system was built that way. And it takes a lot for us to be able to go back and say, hey, wait a minute, let's look at that. It's like building a whole house and finding out the foundation is faulty and deciding I may have to tear down this entire house to fix this foundation, but once it's fixed, then I have a much more stable home. So these are the things that we need to talk about. And for those who are on the call right now, tell me, Jen, why don't you start with this? Why is it important for white people to understand why they're engaging in this work? So once they understand the historical aspects and they say, I want to make a difference, why? How do you help them to understand that?
Right. And I think that, you know, for white people, you know, especially, you know, I've been seeing a lot on my Facebook feed about people, you know, white people that I would not have imagined, you know, posting things about Black Lives Matter and all that kind of stuff. And it's interesting that this is, you know, the murder of George Floyd was the thing that turned the corner for them. But it's, you know, we all go into this profession, I think, help. But I think even now more than ever, white people need to understand the why. And so are they driven by white guilt, that, you know, they feel guilty because they've been complicit and sitting on the sidelines? Or, you know, are they experiencing white shame, where they feel ashamed of because they've benefited from what's happened in society? And then, you know, there's white saviorism where we're going to swoop in, like Ayoma was saying, with the Abbotsford Project and stuff, and, you know, we're going to swoop in and save these poor Black children. And so if our practices, if white people's practices or their why is driven by any of these things, then they really need to do some personal work before engaging in anything, because if we don't have a solid understanding of why we're doing this, that it's not driven by white shame, white guilt, or white saviorism, then it's actually harmful to the cause. And so that personal work is absolutely necessary by white people to understand why they want to engage in this work, because white people like to jump in and fix things, and we can't have that happening.
I think too there's a whole level of that I just haven't even thought about that being important for young children. And I think that there are a lot of us in the field that that are approaching this not necessarily because they're a savior, and not necessarily because they understand the history that's going on and what has caused them to be in these positions. They're here, like you said earlier, Rosemary, because they love children, and they just want to love children, and they want to protect children from these scary and terrible thoughts. And so they consider themselves, as you said earlier, not racist because they're not discussing it, or they're colorblind, or they're avoiding it. And when it comes down to actually being in the classroom, right, what we can do there in that classroom is take those steps, right? One individual as a teacher in the classroom, can I change all of the systems right now? I can by addressing what's going on in my classroom with these children right here in front of me now today, right? So I can take those steps, and as Jen was saying, like I can start to work on me and growing and learning more and taking those steps. I can acknowledge that to my children. I can set up an environment that normalizes conversation about race instead of avoiding it, right? Oh, don't say that, honey. We don't talk about that, right? Well, I want to set up my classroom in a way that conversation is a part of every day, right? So one of the things I do in my classroom, in my care station, I have Band-Aids. I have sought out and found true color Band-Aids in multiple different colors and put them on the care station. When the children fall and have an owie and a boo-boo and they take care of each other, they go to that care station and then they try and pick out the right Band-Aid. That's a spontaneous conversation. That's a teachable moment right there, where the children are talking about, this one matches you sort of, this one doesn't match you. You've invited an opportunity to have a conversation about race, which is a conversation about race, not yet a conversation about racism, but it's a place where we start and we have that conversation with our children so that that's normalized in the classroom and we're talking about it. And that's an avenue where we can start to grow away from our passive racism.
And if I could talk to some of my white people, I'm sorry, Rosemary, because I, obviously have a lot of them. I would say a couple of things. And I think just hearing Jennifer and Dorothy kind of just spell out, here's what y'all can do. I would say that I'm glad you love children, but if you look at it from a systemic point of view, you can't if you're literally throwing out 36 and 48-month-old children, right? So let's think about it and why that, and why are we quick to do that? So that's one. Two is, many times, don't visit your emotions on us Black people, right? Because we've been dealing with it for a long time, Sorry, so I have kids in here somewhere. So don't visit your emotions on Black people, because we have had to actually literally coddle you, which means that we've had to create a lot of emotional bandwidth that we didn't have. That if you look at the health literature, we are probably going to die early because of the weathering of having to situate ourselves within the white world and then situate ourselves within our community and vice versa. So I would say there's a way for you, and I think Jennifer and Dorothy were right, begin to seep yourself in the knowledge, in querying everything, and create a group that can really help challenge each other. And of course, we want to do this in a together way, but at this point in time, some of us are so raw, right? Because we have been pushed to the brink, that I think it's important we acknowledge that Black people or people of color can't always be in the room with you, helping you to process. And so giving some of that space to do that.
Absolutely. Right. And I think also, to build on your point, Ayoma, is that, when white people begin their self-education, it has to be self-education. They can't rely on their Black peers to educate them, because that's trauma, that's re-traumatization, and we have to do the work ourselves. And I think, it's a good point, is like putting yourself in spaces where you can process this together. But, if you are, it's okay to experience guilt and shame and all that kind of stuff, but you can't stay there. And so it's like, what are you going to do after you process the realization that the history we have been taught is not the real history of our country? What are you going to do then? You can't stay in that place of shame and guilt, or it's just nothing's ever going to change.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you saying that, Jen, because as you become more uncomfortable and you go through that shame and that guilt, and then you come to me, then you put me in this position as the victim to
Right.
comfort you. And,
Right.
and as Ioma said, our bandwidth, we are just done. This is just too much. And I appreciate all of the resources that are becoming available so that people can have these conversations, begin to heal, and begin to address this issue. And as we talk about that, Dorothy, I'm wondering, because of your expertise in trauma, as people begin to understand why and they begin to do this work, how can they deal with their own bias and stress response? And what supports do they need, or can leaders provide as they think about how to become anti-racist in this environment?
I think there are a lot of things that we can think about. One of the things that's really important to understand is right now, in the current situation with this pandemic, we are all under a lot of stress, right? There's a lot of stress that's caused by this. It's only at a level of stress that's affecting us, the lack of predictability in our lives, our immobility, right? The fact that we can't travel and be together for this this session, right? Our loss of connection to other people, our loss of time, our loss of sense of purpose and agency, right? Our loss of sense of safety. All of those things are stressors for all of us. But anyone who has any kind of history of trauma, anyone who has their own background, neglect, abuse, anything like that, that has a history of trauma, this is re-traumatizing. So it's not just a stressor. This is a stressor that's a chronic stress that's putting us over the top. So generational stress, right? That's passed on, generational trauma that's passed on, and the stress and the trauma of grieving, right? As a community, the Black community is grieving the lynchings for decades, right? Whether it's been videotaped or not, that grief, that constant fear and pressure is a stressor that's in the background. So as these things are released and shown, Mr. Floyd's video of his death that's triggering and stressing and re-traumatizing, right? So families are feeling this, children are feeling this, teachers are feeling this, and then we're coming together under all of these circumstances. You have to wear a mask, you can't touch these children to comfort and support them. All of these in the same ways that we would before. We can't, children can't run into each other's arms, they can't be in our laps, we got to social distance. All these things are additional stressors and triggers, and those are pieces of things that we need to acknowledge, we need to be aware of, and we need to be doing the work for ourselves, not just in growing and learning and becoming anti-racist, but also in healing and supporting ourselves and each other in the stress and the trauma that this brings up, and acknowledging that the stress and trauma is very different for someone who's been grieving lynchings for generations, right? As a part of their community experience on top of their historical trauma that's passed on, and recognizing that that's a different thing than just, okay, so we fixed it, right? The police aren't going to do that anymore, so it's all better now. Right? Is not the case. There's a lot of personal healing that has to happen as well.
Mm-hmm.
And if I could add to the trauma, and I just love, Dorothy, how you sort of really talked really expansively about the trauma. I also want to add that, especially as a researcher who, a lot of us have been talking actually about ACEs, right? We all know about ACEs, but one thing that was not in the ACEs with Philetes is that there was nothing about racism, right? So again, this is where we sort of say, hey, everybody has trauma. right? But then when you ignore one of the biggest trauma that the country was still exposing many Black people in particular and other, you know, oppressed people, it just tells you that a lot of even what we consider science is perpetuating the same system. And so that's one thing. So I think it's to continue to interrogate every piece of what we think we know and whose voices are not part of it, right? Like, it's, of course, trauma, sexual violence is traumatic. Having, you know, losses due to incarceration or substance abuse, all those are traumatic. But imagine when your own trauma of your community is never made as something that we should create a public health for is critically important. And then the other piece is, because early childhood, especially those who are direct service providers, are females, it's something that we have to also understand. So the George Floyd murder that we all, you know, I haven't watched it because I don't need to watch it. I'm not gonna watch it. I don't, there's nothing that's gonna do for me personally. But if that's what it allow people to say, yes, racism exists, for me, it's actually a little sad, because for us to witness somebody die for 9 minutes, what it allowed you, when we had deaths before. We had somebody pretty much shot jogging. We had a Black woman killed in her home. And so so because a lot of our early childhood workforce of women tend to carry the burden of emotional labor. And so imagine if you're a Black woman in early childhood and women, most of the pain of Black women are never known, right? When a male gets killed, I have a son, he's 3. That has an emotional toll on me, just thinking through that lens of a mother, as a female, as a Black community member. There's so much in that. And so for early childhood, in many ways, to not acknowledge a lot of the things that our Black women, who tend to make up a good chunk of early childhood, who were less paid. They make, what, $75 to every dollar of a white woman, I think maybe even less. So even a lot of the things that are happening, I don't want to hear people crying and moaning. I want you to change it so that, you know, Black women are not continue to be vicariously, you know, traumatized because of the way we pay them, the systems. But I think we have to also make who they are visible. Like, I'm not even pushing the Black male versus Black female, but I am saying that we all are galvanized around George Floyd. Again, I get it. But we don't talk about the women who have been brutalized by the hands of police and have been legally sanctioned to do that. And so I think in many ways we have to be the ones to say, what about our children? But also, what about our women, right? Because by continuing to be silent on women issues is going to impact early childhood, especially if we want to come back to normal following COVID. So I'm actually even imploring us to be very, very clear that we need to mobilize around racism writ large. And if it's George Floyd that got you there, great. But we also have to mobilize around how we're treating and making invisible the labor from which early childhood sits on is primarily a lot of Black women and other women of color.
Beautiful. I think too, we have to acknowledge that all of those ACEs, right? All of those ACEs have their roots in historical racism, right? There's not one ACE on that original study that was done that you can't look at and say, so incarceration in the family, wait, where does that come from, right? So all of those situations are things that are connected, right? This is all connected to racism. And the questions that are asked in that ACEs study are all dependent on it all came from people that had insurance, quality insurance at the time, right? That had good insurance, which in this country, insurance is job related, right? So who are we not even looking at in that original study? 17,000 people, that original study didn't even look at other people, right? And that's why I talk a lot about right now, right? The trauma that's happening right now to people, that's deepening for people, that because of the situation that we're under, right? Because of the lack of security and everything that's going on. Everybody's experiencing it, but who is it really impacting? In which are the communities that are truly impacted by this disease, right? That are really having the heaviest impact. And that's just the physical health aspect, right? What about all the rest, right?
Absolutely. And the impact of generational trauma on what's happening with African-American families and other families of color today, returning to the scene of trauma. Because for a lot of us, we were traumatized in school as adults. We don't truly trust the system. So when you're looking at families who are not as involved as you think they should be, then they have to come to terms with their own trauma and what happened to them as children. Some of you know my story, having been suspended and kicked out of schools. I did not enroll my children turning them over to early childhood. I was hyper vigilant about making sure they were cared for in a way I never was as a child. But as we continue with, and I'm loving this conversation, as we continue with how to create an anti-racist early childhood space, Ioma and then Jen, can you tell us some of those first steps? What are some of the things that we need to do right away?
Well, first I say, it's almost like the 12 steps. You need to acknowledge where you came from. I feel like we need to sort of have a moment, like a moment of silence to thank the children, to thank the families, to thank, like at high school Perry, it was Eugene Beatty, to thank the principal who said, hey, I believe in what you're doing, David. Let me go get all my community members who already don't trust white people in the 60s in Michigan after the Detroit riot. Let me go get them and have them be an experiment in your study. So I feel like that is the first and foremost, that we have to literally acknowledge that. I would like to have it publicly displayed somewhere. And I'm dead serious. Like, I need that to happen. And then I think what we should do is actually take a little bit of a step back. And really, I think for everybody is to interrogate all aspects of it. I think even from what Jen and Dorothy were saying, interrogate, why are you in this space? If it's to sort of be a savior or to love children, examine how are you doing that and what do you believe is a result of this. I would almost say that a lot of it is like to just go back, taking a moment of silence and really, really, really uncover what is your role, what is your goal, and then also inquire, who have I spent the most time with? Who have I talked the most with? I've seen so many witnesses and I've been in so many early child programs where it's a 5-star, the highest quality, and you walk in the room and the first 10 minutes, random time, I'm like, I literally see how you literally are so dismissive. Again, it's not intentional probably, which of course is not, but even being able for you to go through and say, who am I not reaching? Who am I not connected to? I mean, it may be harder even now with social distancing. Who have I not called? Who have I not checked in on? Because, I didn't even like the family. They always gave me attitude, how have I called it? So I would say even just some internal reflection. And then I would say, go query your entire curriculum base. And I would say, one, do that. As you're doing that, look at some of the African-centered approaches and see whether or not it aligns with that. So if you look at African-centered approaches, it's not just about reading and writing. It's about community. It's about spiritual guidance. It's about the fact that children have onus, and our job is to bring out the best of who they are. It's not to just force feed them what we think they should know, but it's what is going to make them the best self. So I think to me, it was almost like, go look at some of the African-centered literature. We have, Asa Haley, we have a lot of scholars in that world that was never allowed to come forward in a way that others have been allowed to come forward. So I would say challenge even your curriculum base, challenge who's in your program. So for me, it's almost like you have to probably take a step back, since everybody's at home for the most part, for those who have the luxury to do that, is to actually go and literally look at, how did your program start? How were your teachers selected? Who's your director? Why is that your director? What's your curriculum? What's your assessment? What are they tapping into? Is it under the guise of white privilege? Is it to privilege only certain groups of kids? So I mean, there's many steps, but I'm hoping part of it is that you just ask the question and then figure out why. To me, the only way you can get something is just asking the whys of every single thing you thought you know, is to just ask why. And if you're like, okay, that aligns with anti-racism, then I'm good to go. But if it doesn't, which it probably won't, then you'll begin to inquire, how do I be part of the change effort? What power and privilege do I have? And how do I sort of expand my network to include literature that I've never read? Because you may actually have to go re-educate yourself. So that made me go to a Racial Equity Institute, really understand the history. The African American Museum, which I made it earlier, actually has a whole it's free. You can literally go and understand the history. So I think take time to really understand the history and how racism actually operates. And I think that would help you begin to interrogate every piece of things that you know. And I think that would be the most valuable thing that you can do.
Right. And I think that, you make so many good points, Ioma, about where to start. And it's like, we have this tendency to just want to jump in and fix. And so, now is we need to hit the pause button as much as the systems need to change. But for white people in particular in the system, in the early childhood education, they need to educate themselves deeply about the history of our country and white supremacy and how that plays out in all of our institutions, including early childhood, And like you said, just examine how white supremacy shows up in our spaces, in our early childhood spaces. And then, then we can begin to have a conversation about how do we move forward in building more just and equitable early childhood spaces for young children, because we can't do that if we're not fully educated and we're reflecting on, because everybody has a role to play, but and you need to figure out what your role is going to be in this, so that you're not, this passive racist. And so I think that's really important, but you can't do that until you're highly educated about the history of our country.
And I think, again, on a very classroom level, right? I'm going to keep bringing it back, right? Those are really, really important steps. And I know that there are classroom teachers on here that are saying, yeah, but what am I going to do tomorrow, right? What am I going to do when those children come back for the first time? What am I going to do? And an important first step is to admit to yourself that if you are not being anti-racist, you are promoting racism, right? You are racist in that classroom. And that where do we learn that from, right? Where does it come from? We cannot say that I don't talk about that, I don't do any of that, I'm colorblind, or any of those things, and think that children are learning racism at home from racists at home that are telling them directly how to behave. It's not the truth. The children are designed, they're built to learn from what they see, to make sense and categorize and sort. That's what our preschoolers do, right? They sort and categorize what they're seeing and what they're hearing. They are watching all the time and making sense. We're dependent. How often have we as classroom teachers said, do I have to tell you that? Did you not just hear me say that to Joey? Right? I just said that to Joey. That we're expecting them to learn from what we say and what we do. We're expecting them to internalize that and make sense of that all the time. So we shouldn't be surprised at all that they are learning from and making sense of our biases and our racist actions in the classroom when we pick on certain people over other people, when we correct boys more often than girls, when we correct or remove the darker skinned child from the classroom, right? Those are things that we do, that they watch, that they learn from, right? We've all had experiences in the classroom where we've said, what happened to my book, whatever it is, and some child in the classroom responds and says, oh, Joey took it. Joey's not even here today. They have learned that Joey is the one because they've learned it from you. They've seen you pick that child out. We are teaching racism all the time. Every minute that we are not teaching anti-racism, we are teaching our children to be racist.
And this applies so I would say, yes, you spoke it. I had to clap for you on that one. This applies also to teachers of color and Black teachers. We as a people are not immune from being gatekeepers, right? Because if you think about it, during the George Floyd murder, there was somebody who looked phenotypically Black in that situation. Yes, they may not have had power, but there was somebody who looked phenotypically Black in that, right? So again, we as, Black people or people of color, we also maintain a racist system because of all the things that we have acquiesced to, and because we have drank the full Kool-Aid of the country that to be closer to white is right? That is a Kool-Aid we all drink. We can see most of the kids who are probably suspended, if we dug deep, are probably going to be kids who look darker and much darker skinned, right? So I think that we all of us in many ways have to interrogate and really question how and why and what do we know. And Black people, we are not immune to that, and it does require us to pay attention to that. That we have said that anything that is white is privilege, and Black people, because our livelihood, our safety required us to be as closely aligned to the majority and the powerful. And so in early childhood, that is visited as well. So going to a Black majority school does not mean you're going to have this level of anti-racism, this level of acknowledgement of African-centered practices. I, of course, would hope that's the case, but that's not what we see, right? Because you have been schooled in the same exact system as white people. You are drinking the same exact Kool-Aid. And it's hard to try to fight a system that doesn't view you as visible and doesn't view you as powerful or even knowledgeable. So I think it also requires Black people and other people of color to sort of be much more introspective about what does that mean for us, and when we maintain a system that literally is focused on actually oppressing us and who we are on many levels. And then I want to just make sure I note that I've been in a various webcasts, and one of them has focused really on just families and parents, and I hear a lot of parents said, I can't talk about race with my kids, right? And Dorothy, to your point, like I'm not ready. I feel like it's not appropriate. And I, as much as I want to be like really nice and kind now, I'm like, I don't have that choice. I don't get to say, hey, Aries and Alani, I can't talk to you about that. No. I don't have that choice. That the privilege you live in allows you to make those choices. However, what it means that you, white people, white mother, you have like we know that kids see race, and exactly, Dorothy, that's right. They may not do racism quite yet, but they see race very early. We know as early as 9 to 10 months, they follow, their eye gaze follows particular things. They are already primed. We know from the Clark-Dawes test, we have researchers back in the 60s that show that even Black kids and white kids are like, the white doll is better and smarter and pretty and everything. The Black doll is ugly, mean, and everything. So in that age, kids already are recognizing that, and they're getting younger, right? They're getting younger, and so I think they're adultifying a lot of what we're already saying as adults. So we are creating it in such an early age that I'm worried that we have to, like, I mean, I started infant toddler. When my kids were born, I was like, you got to see brown people, Black, everything, right? So we have to actually start earlier, not just the pre-K level. We have to actually start earlier in terms of really ensuring that we as adults are intentional about creating anti-racist environments, about being intentional about who are we speaking to, how are we speaking to them. All that has to really be done as before the kids are even born. That is the reality of it.
And at the same time, we cannot wait until we've studied everything, read every book before we start doing this work. Those kids are showing up this week in my classroom. I am going to be facing those children this week in this classroom. Oh, wait, my eyes are open. I know that there's a lot for me to learn. That's the conversation we need to have with our children, with these little tiny babies. We need to be saying to them, you know what? I'm trying to learn about this. Help me learn. Tell me what you see me do that I can do better. And those children will tell you. They will absolutely tell you, hands down. I have children that have told me flat out who I call on and who I don't. And well, you don't like Joey. I know you don't like Joey because you are always yelling at Joey. So let those children tell you. So you know what? That's a mistake I'm making. I need to learn about this. We can learn alongside our children. That teaches them so much more.
Right, and I just want to say a couple things. One is that, Ayama, I was going to bring up the white people talking to their children about race too, and if white people do not talk to their children about race and racism specifically, and not focusing on individual racism, focusing on the systemic racism, that we are in danger of creating another generation of passive racists. And so it's essential that we talk to our children about racism, but not focusing on the individual, because, a lot of white people like to just say, just be kind to everybody and love everybody, and know that we can't be doing that. We got to be talking about the systemic racism. And then I also wanted to say, because there was a question in the chat thing, or the question and answer thing, that I wanted to talk about, getting feedback from Black community so that we're not dismantling the system in a purely misguided and accidental way. And I think that, this goes back to who is in leadership positions, who is making decisions, who is guiding policy going forward, because, white people can't be leading this work. We have to be beside or behind, but never in front of the work going forward, or it's just, that's when it's in danger of being misguided and recreating the status quo.
Right, and being performative in many ways is, that's the term that we're starting to see, where it's definitely wonderful to see, the multiracial sort of focus and attention to issues of race and racism and inequities, and that's great. But it's to make sure that it's not performative, meaning don't just do it because it's a great thing to do now, but do it because you really understand that it's about today, it's about tomorrow, it's about next year. And so that requires us to be to be thoughtful, and to be really engaged, and also be ready to know that you're probably going to F up. Like, that's just going to be facts, right? And
Right.
then to how do you bring Black voices in, right? I would say there's a lot of Black voices everywhere. They probably been talking to you forever and a day, and you just didn't
Right.
listen. So I would say, you know, if you're like, let me go find the Black people or the people of color, go give me some thoughts, they probably already gave you thoughts. And today may not be the day to ask them anymore about their thoughts, right? So, but I'm saying that facetiously to say, you know, make sure that you at least look back at your notes or look back at all kinds of needs assessment or whatever focus groups you've done, because a lot of that has probably been given, but not fully heard. And so as you go back to history from 400 years ago, go back to history probably from 60 days ago, right? And you may realize that there was a lot of information being shared, but not fully heard. And I think, and exactly to your point, Jen, I've been seeing, you know, a lot of these sort of popular media folks giving over their Instagram pages or their Twitter accounts to sort of like Black Lives Matter leaders or other marginalized communities to say, we need to take our privilege, our access, and put you forth so you can say it, that I'm not saying this. I mean, I wonder if there's a way to also do that, where in some ways it's like you need to give up some of your power, which we know for a fact, if you're human, I'm not giving you anything. If I can help it, it's my stuff. So
Right.
this will require people who feel like they've earned the power to be leaders to give it up, and to remember that probably what you got, you did not fully earn, right? Because
Right.
white privilege works in a way that you don't have to work. I mean, you have to work hard, but you have to work that hard compared to, you know, Black person over here? Probably not. Your white privilege allows you, your giftedness to flourish and flurry and be rewarded. And so I think it's also white leaders also inquiring, what do I do to give back power, and
Right.
not privilege myself and what I quote unquote created.
And actually, Iyuma, you've touched on a point that Kristen Love made in the question and answer box. Awareness of white fragility can help us come into this conversation without projecting our feelings onto Black people. What approach is best when talking to Black parents? Should I bring up issues of racism with them, or should I educate myself and act accordingly? I think you all have answered most of this. Anything else you'd like to add to that? Okay, then there's another question. The chat box and the question Q&A boxes are just jumping. I believe we're going to have a follow-up webinar to answer all of these questions, but this one is really interesting and I love it. It says, I think it's really important for educators to understand that having an anti-racist classroom is not the same as having a multicultural classroom. This is about removing Eurocentric norms, standards, narratives from the classroom. Anyone like to elaborate on that?
Right, because multicultural classrooms are just, you know, it's just operating within this colorblind ideology that, you know, we're just all, you know, colors of the rainbow, and we all need to be kind to one another and treat everybody the same. And that is not what an anti-bias classroom is. An anti-bias classroom is actively working to disrupt some of those factors that have come into play, and, you know, and making sure that, you know, when we talk about inclusivity, you know, in diversity, inclusivity, and equity, it's like anti-bias classrooms are creating this inclusive, fully inclusive environment where all children are, especially Black children, are empowered and to be a part of the curriculum and guiding some of the activities that are going forward, and working and talking to children about race and racism in a developmentally appropriate way, so that we're not repeating this, you know, from generation to generation. But I'm sure Iyuma has stuff to say too.
You know, I got stuff to say. So, I mean, well, you know, I mean, again, this is what white fragility does. It creates a new language of multicultural, inclusion. Like, there's certain words, again, it's just to soften the blow of, I need you to stop perpetuating a system of racism, right? Like, I mean, that's why I'm like, I'm so happy that Rosemary, you just jumped, you just went in hard, because that word, that lens of like, just, I mean, again, the intention of it, of yes, we want to be able to function in a multiracial society where everybody's provided with the best opportunity. But that language, all it does is exactly what Jen said, which is it just continues to sort of foster this sense of vulnerability, really, for white women. I hate to say it that way, but really just makes it softer so that you don't have to really work hard at dismantling the system that you're fully embedded and coded in. So this is why I feel like we need to be even more precise with our language, right? So to create, oh, let me go to a multicultural class. No, what are you gonna tell me? Like, they're not gonna tell me anything new that's going to dismantle the system that continues to put its boot on my neck or the neck of people who look like me and look like my children. It doesn't do any of that, doesn't challenge anything. It just continues to sort of placate this notion. And that's the thing that me as a researcher scholar is like, I'm like, I want to make sure we're all diverse and we're all like, no, this is the time is up, right? This is hashtag time is up. And I think we have to sort of, and I think for us, we have to continue to push on that, and being able to hear Dorothy and Jen and Rosemary sort of speak to that we cannot allow language that just waters down what we want. We want an early childhood environment, an early childhood system that literally is anti-racist, but even so, needs to be all this anti-Blackness. I would say that there's been a lot done for many people, right? But for Indigenous populations in particular, and Black people in particular, there's been a lot done to literally close out who we are, to not have it show up in classrooms, not have it show up in curricula, not have it show up at all. And so while we're working for an anti-racist classroom, we have to think about how have we been created anti-Blackness in many ways, right? You want to love our culture, the music, the art, the food, but you don't want to love us and what we bring to it, right? Like LeBron James, I think, wrote a tweet, like a one-sentence tweet, that says, "Why don't you love me?" or something so that I can. And that's what that feels like, is like we as a system in early childhood built it off of a lot of Black kids and families, and to still not be able to access it. And then when we access it under this system of subsidy, have you gone through subsidy before? It's like, oh my God, right? So we create accountability. You need to not have all this QRS standards. You need to then you create a system that makes it harder and takes the money outside of the services into accountability. It's almost like you're policing early childhood because we're trying to, under the guise of we're trying to create equitable learning opportunities. And so so for me, I sort of feel like we need to begin to sort of get rid of language that is not authentic to anti-racist values. So, and I think until we do that, we are going to continue to have an early child system that is colorblind, that doesn't recognize that race and racism is permeated through it, and that will not have the outcomes that we talk about. Early child was like, we're gonna help address the achievement gap. Everything was built under that. The achievement gap has not changed. Look at the data. It has not changed, not one iota really. Like, let's be honest about that. Comparing poor kids who got early childhood to other poor kids who got nothing, it's like, well, duh, you gave me a little something, I'm gonna be a little better, of course. Like, give me a little medication, I'll be a little better. But the system is still rot, nothing has changed. So I think that we have to stop using, poor people, Black people, people of color to continue to uphold a system that is not challenging itself to do better and to do more. And it's Friday. I'm a little angry, so I'm apologize.
Hey,
No,
look,
at
if
all.
you all can believe this, we have 5 minutes left.
Oh, no.
So I
I have to jump in, Rosemary. I'm sorry. I have
please go right ahead.
I have to say that there are children right now that are thriving in the environments where they are learning when they are not in schools. And those children that are thriving have been surrounded by their own culture, by people who look like them, who talk like them, by the smells and tastes and spices of their own culture. It's not a couple of pictures on the wall. It is,
right.
This is what they're living in. And their parents, I had a parent who told me the other day, he said, I'm worried about how my kids are gonna do when they go back to school. Are they going to be ready? Because they've had this break from it, from the training of how to be in school. His children are 3 and 5, and he is worried about whether or not this break from the school training of how to be in school, they're going to have problems when they go back. What we need to do in these environments is embrace this moment when families have been separated from their centers and their schools, and recognize that coming back, we need to be open and say those children don't have to change who they are to be successful in our classrooms. That's what we need to be focusing on, that those children should come back to the classrooms as they are, whole people, and we need to embrace them as that. That's how we change 1 minute at a time. Not, that might have worked at home, but we don't do that here in school. We need to shift what we do in school to embrace those families. Sorry.
Right.
No, you are awesome. And I wish we had another hour because we surely need it. But just as a recap, what we know is racism is not neutral. you're either racist or anti-racist. That allowing racism to exist makes you a passive racist. Confronting racial inequities is anti-racist. So what I want, and I know how hard this will be, panelists, but I want one sentence from you that the participants can use. When we have truly created an anti-racist early childhood space, how will we know we're successful? What is the element of success?
Well, I think, for me, just thinking about multifaceted, way of thinking about how we know we've been successful. The first one is, thinking about positive identity and promoting that, and how does that show up in early childhood spaces and developing, positive identities for all children. But also thinking about, the research on where the disparities show up in early childhood education and working to address those. So obviously with suspensions and expulsions, but there's also research on the teacher-child interactions, that Black children have less positive interactions and relationships with white teachers, and also thinking about how instruction is provided. So when there are no more disparities in that, that's one way I think it'll be successful.
Thank you.
I think there isn't an end point. I think this is a continuing journey, because as we evolve, so will the issues, so will the circumstances. As we grow better, as we change things, we will only learn more. So I think an example of success is children and teachers learning together and growing together, and that constant state of knowing what am I not aware of, what am I not working on, what has not yet changed in the system that we can fix.
Thank you.
I'll just say briefly, I think, I agree. I feel like I wish I knew what that was. But I do know that when I can open up an early childhood curriculum or assessment, and there is the history of how early child started, but more precisely that there's Afrocentric in it, that I can see it and I can feel it. And when we honor the works that both Indigenous populations and Black people, when we can see it in everything, and it's been privileged in many ways because it has lost that. And when it's privileged in everything that we do, then I feel like we'll be closer.
Absolutely. And before we turn it back over to our NCPMI webinar person, Victor, I just want very quickly for Ioma and Jen to talk about the books they've written on these topics and where they can be purchased.
So I wrote a book called Achieving Equity and Justice in Education Through the Work of Systems Change. And so obviously it's focused on how we can work to achieve systems change by including voices that have not been heard before. And so you can get that on Amazon.
Okay.
So the beauty, I love technology. I just say my background.
I saw
that. So thank you for the opportunity. I mean, whether you buy it, but it's Don't Look Away is our new book that I just co-authored. You probably can see it as well, with a bunch of colleagues, but really is that we have to lean in and to create an anti-bias early childhood classroom and program. You cannot look away. There is not a second for you to wait. And so this book really tries to take you on a journey of how you go through the history, but also what do you do in your classroom? And here are some tools that you can actually use from day one. So thank you for that opportunity, and many more books and writings forthcoming.
And there's some, thank you. There are some books popping up in chat. There are lots of questions.
Can I say something about Ioma's book real fast?
Yes.
I think that everybody needs to purchase it, because it is just so, it offers opportunity for self-reflection. It digs into, these hard topics that we've talked about today. And I think it's the best place to start if you're ready to commit to being anti-racist.
Thank you, Jen.
Thank you. Thank you. So as I'm looking through the chats and I'm looking through the Q&A, there's a lot we did not get to. I will be following up with a video blog called a vlog. And I am going to ask these amazing presenters if we can get back together and follow up on this conversation, because we really want to answer your questions. You had amazing questions, and we want to make sure that you feel seen, honored, and valued, and have the answers that you need. So at this time, Victor will tell you what will happen next in terms of a certificate and everything.
So thank you very much to all of our panelists and to Rosemarie for their wonderful insights. Your feedback is very important to the work we do. Please remember to provide your feedback on this webinar with our post-webinar survey by typing the web address shown on this slide into your internet browser. Your certificate of attendance will appear once you submit the survey. We invite you to visit our website, challengingbehavior.org, to sign up for our upcoming webinars, access recordings, download pyramid model resources, and more. Thank you to our funder for making this webinar possible. This concludes our webinar. Thank you all and have a great rest of your day.